Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russell Rucker. Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I'm the author of Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic. There is a poster above me here that dictates that. You just saw a commercial for our founders and their words and why they matter, and that's my second book. And there is a poster off to the left of that. Today, I thought I'd talk about the main document. But first, I want to thank Reader's Magnet for allowing me the time to speak to you. And this is an important series here that we're doing. This is day 10, and this is my final show here. But when I talk about the main document, I'm talking about between we the people in order to form a more perfect document, in order to form a more perfect government, and the signatures. And that's really the main document because it's not the amendments. And so I thought I'd go through it a little bit. And when I'm done doing that, I'm going to go through some of the questions that we had yesterday we didn't get to, and we're going to do kind of a wrap up and any questions that you may have. That's really how I want to end this series. Is anything that you want to ask me is fair game. I've studied the Constitution and our founding documents along with a lot of original writings of our founders from the period. And so I am well versed in the Constitution and the historical aspect of it, which I think is important. So let's get into it here. So we get into the Constitution, you get past the preamble, which is we the people, and you get into Article 1, which has the legislative branches. Now, the legislative branches are, of course, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And it's split into two groups with each having different duties and responsibilities. And it's that way because of the Great Compromise, which when they decided to keep the Senate equal, like it had been in the Articles of Confederation, and give the other branch to the popular vote, they gave all spending bills to the House, and they gave appointments and treaties and things like that to the Senate. And of course, they also gave the House the power to impeach, and the Senate would have to sit as trial. When you get into Article 2, you're talking about the executive branch and the duties of the executive, and the fact that you are going to have a president and a vice president serving for equal terms. And then you get into the Electoral College and some of the duties of the executive. Article 3 houses the judiciary. Okay, so that gives you the Supreme Court, and it gives you what they call any inferior courts that may be appointed. So you get your district courts and your different federal courts there. Okay, and that's what they're talking about in the judicial. Article 4 is kind of a wrap up of the rest that's left. You have the full faith and credit of the government. You have a guarantee for a Republican form of government. You have a way of adding new states from the territory that we hold. Article 5 gets into ways to amend it. So you have the two methods. The one is 2/3 of the House and Senate would vote for any amendment, then 3/4 of the states would have to approve it before it becomes part of the Constitution. And the reason they wanted to do that was they wanted to keep the document perpetual. In other words, they wanted the document to go on for forever, basically, or for quite a long time anyway. They didn't want to have to redo this every few years. So they tried to keep that perpetual. The other method in Article 5 is for the states to call for a convention of states, in which all the states would gather and they would propose amendments to the Constitution. My concern with that method is it's the exact same thing that was called for when the Constitution was called for, because originally it was supposed to be just amendments to the Articles of Confederation. So, and they wound up with a whole new document. So that's my fear with going that route. But either way, they're both constitutional, and they're there for the purpose of keeping the Constitution perpetual. Then we get into Article 6, where you have the whole idea there shall be no religious test for anyone serving in government. So they're allowing, that's an important thing. And even after you had the Bill of Rights with the first few amendments and the guarantee of religious practice, you still weren't allowed to discriminate against somebody. So if you're having an appointment to, say, the Supreme Court, they can't complain that you're Catholic, Jewish, or what have you. There can't be a religious test. And it also establishes that the Constitution will be the law of the land. It will be supreme. And you have the oath of office there. When you get down to Article 7, you have the way of ratifying the Constitution, okay, where the states would 3/4 of the states would have to ratify, which they actually have it listed as 9, okay, and that's roughly 3/4, okay, to ratify the original Constitution. And it took a long time for all the states to get through that and ratify it. I know a lot of times people have told me even that the Constitution's not important and it doesn't matter. They aren't interested in it. But what happens is people become interested in the Constitution when something happens that really bothers them. Either they've come afoul of the law somehow, and they're trying to find a way to get around it, or they're offended over something the government's doing, and they're trying to find a way to stop it. And those are really the big reason people generally get involved in it. And I think that's important to understand, that everybody isn't that intrigued. I've spent most of my life arguing over the Constitution, even at work when I wasn't supposed to be. But now that I'm retired, I've written these books, and I'm going around making speaking engagements, and I'm on YouTube, and I've got that Friends of Textualism and Originalism group in Facebook, and I'm still trying to argue the points of why the Constitution's important. So it's really been my life work. Now, I thought I'd get into the few questions I have from yesterday. Robert was concerned about Fourth Amendment protections of freedom with all the technology we have. And I certainly understand that. When you post something on a network, on say Facebook or Twitter or what have you, it can be searched without a search warrant, because you can't say that it's your property, see, because you don't own the platform. And that was a decision that came down just a couple of years ago on this very issue. But the Fourth Amendment against searches and seizures, basically demanding a search warrant, that it has to be explicit what they're searching for or who they're supposed to be seizing. This is really very important. A year or two ago, I was taught in a class that if a cop is following you and you get in your garage, and he can't come in that garage without a search warrant. So, I mean, this came out of an actual case. And they also can't go in your backyard if you have a fence up, because that's considered the house proper. So if you've erected a fence around your home and you're in an attached garage to your home, then they can't go in there without a search warrant. They can't go in your trunk. They can't go in a locked glove box, but they can look through the glass in your vehicle and see that it's there. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but it's really supposed to be a protection. And with all these kind of new technologies, we have to be kind of careful about those protections. I mean, one of the things that's concerned me is traffic law by camera. As you're driving through the city, they're gonna send you a ticket, and because they saw you speeding or something. And what bothers me is when you have an initial traffic stop, and the cop pulls you over, and he goes up there and he's talking to you. When you get something mailed to you, you've lost the ability to explain to the officer what happened, and they're processing against you. And I don't think that is really fair. But this is all up to the judge to decide in a prosecution what to deal with. So, I'm very concerned about the Fourth Amendment, and the Fifth and the Sixth, all the way through the Eighth. The rights of the accused matter, because we need a fair trial. And some of these new technologies, it's hard to just walk around without being filmed, because cameras are everywhere. And, it makes it harder. But at the same time, we need law enforcement to, so that we can all live in a safe society. It becomes important. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a threat of a school shooting. Somebody had broken into a gun shop, and they were concerned about this guy, but they used cameras and realized that they hadn't gone down. This guy had never gone down to the next community, so it gave him kind of an area to look for. But it does concern me, and I want everybody to have a fair process in court. And the Fourth Amendment is really a gathering of evidence amendment. So it puts rules for the police and the FBI, whatever law enforcement you want to talk about, to deal with the force. So I think that's kind of important. Yesterday, we were talking about war a little bit, and Cassandra Wood said, true war have always been ever present in society. I guess that's the byproduct when people get too power hungry. Well, that is probably true. But what's interesting about power hungry is why all these branches were set up, because our founders didn't trust the people, the politicians, primarily, to not get power hungry. That power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And they talked about a flaw of man, of always wanting more power, and that's why you have two branches in the legislature, and that's why you have an independent executive elected separately. See, some countries, they elect the legislature, and the legislature appoints the president, or like the prime minister in England, for instance. So we have an individually elected president, and then we have a free, independent judiciary that doesn't have to run for office. And I think that really gets to the idea of power. They didn't want anybody obtaining too much power. And that's why there's a restriction against a senator or House member of working in another department of government. It's all to limit the power that any one person can get. What they didn't really understand was the the political party system that would emerge, because you really didn't have that in 1789. That kind of came a little bit later, and it came out of Washington's cabinet, which I discussed in the first talk almost 2 weeks ago now. And so I went through that then, if you want to look back at that. But really, that's the whole idea there. Okay. Elmer asks, what do you think is more important, a strong state or a national government? Well, in our system, they're kind of together, only it's not a national government, it's a federal government. It's federalism. And what we really have is kind of both national and federal together. It's part national and part federal. So it's really more like the federal system we had under the Articles of Confederation, with enough nationalism in order to protect the country against armed conflict and exactly what was needed. And the states formed the national government, okay, through their elected people that went to the Constitutional Convention. They're what they call deputies, or what we call delegates today. And they were, and they formed that government. And then it went to the states, went to the Congress. Congress ordered the nominating, not nominating, they ordered the state ratifying conventions. And that's who set up the national government. Well, I think the state really has kind of taken a little bit of a backseat, but I don't think they should. And I think the way the Constitution is written, the states have a lot more power than we realize. And they also have the ability to pull some of that power back if they choose to do so. So I really think, states are important, in this whole realm. There are states' rights, and states' rights are not just the state rights that they were calling for when the Confederacy split away from the United States. They were all calling states' rights, but states' rights are far more than just some component of the Confederacy. Benjamin, thank you for all the good information. you have been giving us over the past 2 weeks. I will definitely be tuning in weekly on your YouTube. Well, thank you, Ben. And as you bring this up, YouTube is important. I drop a video every week, Monday morning at 5 a.m. it drops. So by the time you're up and at 'em, you can go watch that recent YouTube video. I think this last Monday's was on the State of the Union. I go through part of the Constitution or an amendment or some historical aspect to help explain things. And I appreciate that, Ben. JP, what challenge does the Constitution face in the modern era, and how can society address these challenges to ensure its continued relevance? Well, one of the big problems we have is the overreach of the federal government. For instance, the some of your administrative states, some of your departments were never called for constitutionally, like the Department of Energy, the Department of Education. Now, keep in mind, there's nothing wrong with educating the populace, but it should be a state or local issue. And the Department of Energy was devised because to try to keep control of the fuel costs. And obviously that hasn't worked real well either. But I digress. If it's not in the Constitution, we shouldn't be doing it. If these departments are important, then we should send an amendment down to the states and let the states decide whether we want to do that or not. And I think the overpowering bureaucracy is a real problem in our society. I mean, we really don't need that large a federal government. You know, keep in mind that a federal government that's big enough to help you is big enough to come after you. So you have to, there's kind of a soft spot that we have to really get to and maintain. And I think that's really our biggest challenge. And the other thing is we have to start electing people that will adhere to their oath of office, that they will protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. And even your police have to take that oath. Your police, your town boards, your village boards, your city councils, your state assemblies and senates, all have to give that oath. So all these people should be taking their oath seriously. And I remember a couple of years ago hearing about a representative, I think it was a senator, that admitted they hadn't even read the Constitution. I mean, we really shouldn't be electing people that don't even know what's in there. So I guess that's the best I can answer that question. Ben, would definitely tune into your YouTube. I'm sure there's more to learn there. Yeah, there is, Ben, and I appreciate that. And honestly, I really need people to sign up for the channel. I'm doing a lot of work on that, and that's what this studio was designed for, is to do those Constitution talks that I do on YouTube. Robert, wow, Bennington flag, a great symbol of American resilience and determination during the Revolutionary War. Well, thank you, Robert. The Bennington flag is over here. It has the 76 on it, and it flew over the Battle of Bennington. I think it's Vermont. Maybe it was New Hampshire. I can't really remember. It was Vermont. And it was really, I think it was in 1775, and it's really the first battle we fought that we actually won in the conflict. So it's a real symbol, and I'm glad people recognize it, because a lot of people just think it's a bicentennial flag because it has the 76 on it. Carla, why do you think it's important not to give one branch of the government too much power? What would happen if such imbalance happened? Well, kind of what you have today, because the executive has become more important in a lot of respects than the legislative branch. And the judiciary has to weigh in on a lot of things. And I think that's really our big problem, is they have to be co-equal. So the Supreme Court obviously has the last say. But if the executive runs over the top of the legislative branch, then the legislative branch has to take it to court and sue in the Supreme Court to get their rights back. I mean, it's really important that they're co-equal. We don't want a king dictating to us, and by the same character, we don't want too weak a president. So we don't want the legislative branch to run over the top of the president either. And I think that's really what's important about that. Mark says, why is the flag behind you different? Okay. I'm assuming we're talking about the Bennington flag again. And I guess that's really the answer there. We had a lot of early flags. We had the Grand Union flag that flew over originally, and that basically had the 1/4 was the British flag. And then we had the join or die flag. It's the snake. It's not the Gadsden flag. It's the snake with each of the states written on it. And so we've had quite a few different flags, early flags in that era, before we got to the Betsy Ross flag, which really was probably what a lot of people think is the original flag. But the first flag we flew for the whole country was the Grand Union. It was actually first raised by John Paul Jones on the USS Albert, which was later seized by Britain. Robert, do you have an idea about the current status of the original Bennington flag and where it's housed? Well, actually, it's housed in the museum in Bennington, Vermont. If you get a chance, you live up in that area, you can go see it. There's a lot of our important things that are on display, like the Declaration of Independence. You've got a lot of different things. And I mean, Philadelphia is one of, I think it's 5 international historical districts. That's how important it's considered. Now, when I wrote my book, my first book, and the reason I'm republishing it now, and it should be available in Amazon. I know it's available on my website for pre-order. It is up on Amazon, but it says it's out of stock. But if you check out, you can probably get it there in a few days, and it's certainly available on Barnes and Noble. And that's Textualism, the second edition. But one of the important things I did, and I guess to all the other authors out there, when you're publishing a book, you need to be careful to be sure that a publisher is putting everything in that's supposed to be. As I went through it for the second edition, I found a lot of things that were different. And that's why I pulled it and went over to Reader's Magnet, and we republishing it to kind of correct everything. These books I've written are real important. They're important because they don't really change. A historical aspect of things are important to understand. For instance, like I point to the Third Amendment, which has to do with the quarantine, the act where we had to house soldiers. Sorry, the word misses the mark right now, but we have to understand why that's there, and it's there because they were housing our soldiers there, and that's why that amendment's there. In fact, that amendment was considered the absolute most important amendment in the Bill of Rights by our founders when it was passed. So I think that's the best response I can give you there. Holly, the parliamentary and presidential system have different means of separating the legislative and executive powers. What are the pros and cons of each? Well, if you're in a parliamentary system, then the legislature is electing the prime minister or what have you. And in that system, the executive is never against the legislator because the legislature created the executive because they elected him. So there's never a time when you have one party controlling the legislature and another party controlling the executive. And that does give them an advantage per se, because you always are in power. Okay, whatever power, whatever party happens to be there. So that's an advantage. But it goes the other way too, because it means you have less of a divided government and less checks and balances. So I think our system is superior because you have more checks and balances, because he's elected, the president and the vice president are elected separately. And that gives another level of check. So if your House and Senate passes something, he can veto it if he's not happy with what he's doing, and say, the legislative branches of one party and the executive is of another, then there has to be some level of agreement there. And I think that's the advantage we have. Annie, throughout your sessions, I realize the Constitution really isn't perfect. What do you think did it lack the most when it was first written? Well, I'll tell you, one of the big things I think it lacked was the Electoral College. And when the Electoral College was first put in place, the top vote getter became president and the second top vote getter became vice president. So in that situation, you would have a president of one party and a vice president of another party. And that's why we have the 12th Amendment to correct that. I mean, I think that's the most obvious. Now, the other thing that really was in need was a Bill of Rights. And the Constitution almost didn't pass without one. A lot of states were insisting that we have a Bill of Rights before they even signed it. So that, I think, is the real crux of it. Of course, we can go into all kinds of things like the 13th through 15th Amendments, because we had this slavery problem and, all those kinds of things. I mean, we could spend hours discussing that. But I really think that is the biggest problem we had, because we had a defect we didn't realize was there. And after the election of 1800, after 35 votes were taken and we were deadlocked, it became pretty obvious that we had a problem. Melinda, the Constitution mentions of the federal government explicit powers. Do you think they would also need some explicit power to be more effective? I actually think we have a very good Constitution. The problem we have is that it's not adhered to all the time. One of the problems I see is the executive orders from the president. And sometimes those executive orders are running over the rights of the legislative branch. And for instance, ordering something that costs money without the votes of the legislature. And then the next thing you know, we're in the Supreme Court and they're trying to decide that issue. And I really think, that's the biggest problem we have, is the fact that we have a group of people that don't really want to adhere to it. And the federal government doesn't like it because it restricts power. It gives power to the states, especially when you look at Article 10. So anything that is not mentioned, or excuse me, Amendment 10, anything that's not mentioned in the Constitution belongs to the states and to the people. And I think that's important. But the federal government wants more power all the time. There's a tug of war between the states and the federal government, and between the legislature and the executive. You know, our presidency was not as strong as it is today in the first 50 or 60 years of our republic. You know, it took a long time of the president taking this or taking that, and it became a part of the executive then. And I think that's the biggest problem we've had over time. But I do think we have a very good Constitution, and I really do believe that. And Cassandra says, have you thought about running for positions in the local government? I have held positions in the local government. I've served in 2 of the branches of my local government. It's been sometimes difficult, and sometimes you have trouble getting anywhere, especially if you are in the legislative branch. You can't really do anything by yourself, and you have to get a whole group of people to agree, and that can be a grueling fight sometimes. I actually wrote the safety committee ordinance for my local municipality. Wrote for a safety committee, so I am kind of well versed in how the government's supposed to work, and I really thank everybody for the time here that we've gone through, and the 2 weeks. It's been a lot of fun. And I hope you've gotten something from my talks. Pick up my book and read it. I even submitted my textualism book to the chief of police so that he could see what I had written. And you know, the textualism was written kind of so you can actually look up the amendment. And the Constitution's in there, and then below the one paragraph, I write what it means next, and so forth. And there's a few historical things in there listed too. But the idea was so that you can write out, you can look up the document, you can look it up and see what I've said it means. And that was the whole purpose of textualism and originalism, to really try to make people better understand it, give them a document they could look it up. And textualism really is just going by the text. And originalism is going by the original intent of the founders or Congress at the time the amendments were sent to the states. So it's not just 1787. Our last amendment, I believe, passed in 1992. It was one of the original 12 in the Bill of Rights. There's still one that has not been approved. My second book, Our Founders, goes through a lot of small stories to kind of tell how we got there and what we're doing and why things were done the way they were. And there's even a chapter explaining the Constitution in there. You have the original Bill of Rights coming out of the House in there. You have an original version of the Declaration of Independence. So there's and the Bill of Rights. So there's lots of different things that you don't normally see there. And each chapter has quotes from the founders and that explaining what they are talking about. So it helps tell it. And that's really about it. I hope you've got something, and thank you very much for your time. You have a good day, and we'll see you soon, I'm sure. Bye.